Right. So I look at three different areas. They're very similar to what you were just saying. And the first one is passion. So it has to be something that you enjoy or something that you're really excited about. A different, whatever type of person you're working with, you just need to be excited about it. The next thing is aptitude, which is kind of similar to like having a natural market. What is your past experience that you've had to work with this niche? Or, do you have some sort of expertise that you really enjoy in your practice that's going to serve a certain type of niche? So where are you kind of a natural fit for whatever niche that you want to work with? And then the third one is profitability. Same thing. I have seen people choose niches where the amount of volume that they have to do to make it worth it to them is just not feasible.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, CEO of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And a big shout out to a friend of mine and an industry colleague, I guess you could say, Kristen Harrod, who introduced us to Kristen Luke, who we're joined with today. And Kristen Luke is the president of Kaleido Creative Studio and also author of a book that I just got in the mail this morning, actually, Uncomparable, the Financial Advisor's Guide to Standing Out Through Niche Marketing. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking through today, ranging from niche marketing to utilizing content in your marketing and ultimately becoming an expert in the industry that you're in, financial services, with the people that you serve, aka your niche. So with that said, Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I guess to start off the show, whenever I'm helping folks with coming up with a niche or arriving at a decision, I talk to them about wanting to check three boxes before making that decision. And I'd like to know how this compares to how you help folks thinking through a niche. So I tell them, it needs to be profitable, right? So as an example, you could love helping teachers, elementary school teachers, but you're going to need to work with a ton of elementary school teachers, right, to make any money. Number two, you need to have a passion in working with them. So when I first became an advisor, I thought I wanted to work with attorneys. And nothing against attorneys, but our personalities, let's just say, didn't match up very well. And although it was a profitable place to hang out, it didn't give me any fire in my belly to serve them. And then third, which is optional but preferred, would be some sort of natural affiliation. So maybe you used to be in this industry, you have family or a spouse that's in the industry, to where it's easier to break in. So with that in mind, Kristen, how do you think through an advisor choosing a niche as it relates to some of those check boxes that I outlaid?
It's funny. I feel like you've just read my book.
I just got it this morning, so I have not read it yet, but perhaps there's some overlap.
Right. So I look at three different areas. They're very similar to what you were just saying. And the first one is passion. So it has to be something that you enjoy or something that you're really excited about. A different, whatever type of person you're working with, you just need to be excited about it. The next thing is aptitude, which is kind of similar to like having a natural market. What is your past experience that you've had to work with this niche? Or, do you have some sort of expertise that you really enjoy in your practice that's going to serve a certain type of niche? So where are you kind of a natural fit for whatever niche that you want to work with? And then the third one is profitability. Same thing. I have seen people choose niches where the amount of volume that they have to do to make it worth it to them is just not feasible. So that's kind of the third deciding factor is like, can you actually make money on this? Because if you can't, then you just need to pick a different niche. And that doesn't necessarily mean AUM. I think a lot of people get caught up in like, well, they don't have the assets, so I can't serve them. If they have the income to be able to, pay your fees, like a flat fee or something like that, that's something to consider too. So just because they don't have assets doesn't mean you have to turn them away, but they do have to be able to pay you for what you're worth.
Understood. And how do you deal with a scenario? So I'll paint a couple different pictures. So one is, I've had conversations with advisors that are like, well, my passion is, being active and mountain biking and paddleboarding and, doing all these, various activities. I want to work with people that also do that. Um, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like it's a good thought, but it could also be difficult to find those people, and those people who participate in those activities maybe all over the map as it relates to various careers, which essentially means you find yourself in a position of making all different promises to all different people and not really being in a position to scale with one group of people that's fairly similar. And then the other scenario that I've come across is the challenge with saying, should I, because I feel like advisors are like, okay, once I pick a niche, I want my website to reflect that, my messaging to reflect that, my content to reflect that. And they're hesitant to commit to a niche as to put in all that work just for it to maybe not work. So like someone who says, I want to work with veterinarians that own their practice. I may say, hey, why don't we start in working with business owners and refine that over time, depending on where you find yourself spending the most of your time. So when you think about those more either obscure niches that advisors come up with, as well as the hesitancy to commit to a niche, help me understand how you work with advisors who find themselves in those positions.
Sure. So the first example of someone who's interested in outdoor activity or being active, that's not really a niche, that's a networking strategy. It's just where are you going to be to talk to those people. I think of a niche as it has to be people with common characteristics who share a common problem. And like you said, those people don't share a common problem. So in my book, I give the example of, just because you like to golf doesn't mean golfers is a niche, because they could be people who are just starting out in their career. They could be retired people. They could be business owners. Like they have completely different needs depending on who they are. If you wanted to make golfers a niche, you would look at maybe people who are just becoming professional golfers. They're finally making enough money to pay for their tour, and now they have enough money to look at, how can they secure their future going forward, because this is going to be a short-term career for them. That's a problem that they all would share, and that's how you can make golfers a niche. But golfers as a whole is just not a niche, because they don't share the same problem. It's too many different people. You might as well just say, I work with everybody. You just happen to meet them on the golf course. It's a networking strategy. It's no different than going to like your local chamber of commerce or something like that. To answer your second question about focusing on a niche, I always tell people, like, when you focus on a niche, you can still work with whoever you want, right? Like you can still take the referrals. You can still, anyone who comes to your website, you can still take them on as clients. But when you choose a niche, all of your marketing energy is going to be going towards that group. And I know it can be scary for people to say, well, what if I put all this energy and it doesn't work? Well, if you put half your energy into one niche, and then half into another, I guarantee you it's not going to work. It's like you have to basically implement multiple marketing plans, and they don't generally have enough time and energy to put towards one marketing plan, let alone multiple. And so you have to just kind of go all in. Well, I don't want to say go all in. You have to put your effort towards one niche and just really make it work. Unless you see something in there that's just saying like, these people don't want my services, then maybe you need to switch. But it does take a while for people to get to know you and like you and trust you. And so, you're not going to see results in the, 6 months, might take several years. But if you're starting to see traction, then that should be reinforcement that you're on the right track. But one advisor should focus on one niche, or a couple of advisors on one niche. You should not have one advisor focusing on multiple niches. There was something else that you mentioned about that question.
So let's say someone wants to work with veterinarians, right? That own a business. Do you suggest that they niche down that far right away, or do you suggest that perhaps they start with business owners in general and see kind of where they naturally gravitate to in terms of a specific industry within the business owner space?
I would say it depends on their connections. Like if they already have a large network of veterinarians, I think that would be a really good place to start. And then maybe you can expand beyond that if the market's getting too small. I think business owners is a really tough one as a whole because what stage are they at? Are they exiting? Are they just starting out? Are they kind of thriving and just making a lot of money? It's like a cash cow. All of that is completely different. So I actually do think narrowing in is better if it makes sense, but a lot of people aren't there yet. They haven't had enough experience to know if that's the direction they want to go. So starting a little bit wider is okay, but at least narrowing in on what is that one problem that you need to solve? Is it exit planning? Is it, at the startup stage? Where is it that you're working with these people?
Understood. And a moment ago, you brought up something important where you said, you can still work with referrals and things like that, but your marketing efforts are spent on going after the niche that you chose. And when I work with advisors, and I'm sure you come across this as well, when you're just starting out as being an advisor, depending on how you got into the industry, in order to survive, there's an argument to be made that you need to work with anyone who can fog a mirror, who's willing to work with you, right, to get the business, off the ground. So let's say we're, meeting with an advisor who, he or she is, 10, 15 years in the business and their clients are all over the map and they're just now waking up to the importance of honing in on a niche. And they've shared with me, hey, I'm afraid to alienate my current client base. So my two-part question is, how do you handle that scenario? And two, does the advisor communicate anything proactively or reactively to their client base in advance of it coming up, or once it does, if it does come up from a client that expresses a question around it?
Yeah, so I come across this quite a bit, and my solution is, when we comes to your website, just have a page for your new niche. You don't need to change the rest of it. The only reason this would be a problem is if your clientele is completely different than your niche. Where, for an example, in my book, I talk about Lindsay Swanson, who's pretty well known in the industry for working with sex workers. Like having a page for sex workers on a page for your pre-retiree clients isn't going to fly. But for most people, that's not the case. Like if you're working with real estate agents, you can just have a tab, navigation tab for real estate agents, and no one's going to think anything of it. They're just going to think it's a specialty area. And so for the most part, you can keep your website the same, just have a separate page for your new niche. All of your efforts to your new niche, your clients aren't even going to know because they're not in that community. And so they're not going to be paying attention to what you're doing. It is going to be important to segment out the communication to your niche versus your existing clients. So again, if you're working with like veterinarians, you don't want to be sending out the content you're sending to them to your client base as well. So you do have to kind of manage two different marketing channels a little bit, or strategies for that to work. But you really shouldn't say anything to your clients until this is something you're sure that you want to go down, and at the point where you want to start offboarding your clients, because this new niche is so much more streamlined and profitable for you. But a lot of the clients I work with just don't do that for a long time. And the clients aren't really paying that much attention to you, I have to say. I was just on social media and someone was complaining about, they had sent out dozens and dozens of announcements about TD Ameritrade becoming Schwab. And then when the client got a message from Schwab, they were like, I didn't know that was moving to Schwab.
Like I sent you 7 emails on that.
Yeah, right. And it's like, that's just, people aren't paying that much attention to you, your clients. And so it's just really, it's more of an issue in the head of the advisors than an actual issue.
And I have this client that I'm working with now who he's found himself spending a lot of time in 3 main areas. One is with widows. The other one is with business owners. And then the last one is physicians. So all over the map.
Yep.
And he's considering building out similar to what you just alluded to, which is a separate tab or, landing pages, for each of those segments. If you were having a conversation with them, what advice would you give him when he's trying to split in 3 different areas? And let's also be under the assumption that a third of his revenue currently comes from widows, a third business owners, a third physicians. How do you handle something like that?
And it's just one advisor. He doesn't have a team.
There's 2 advisors, soon to be 3 advisors. And when I say that out loud, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'll shut up and let you say
it.
I
think it's really important to have one advisor focused, being kind of spearheading one niche. And so if you could have an advisor spearhead each of those niches, I think it's possible, because each person is then responsible for that one marketing plan. If it was just him, I would say you really need to focus on one and put all your energy towards that, because he is spreading himself thin at this point, and it makes it really difficult to get traction with any of those groups. And so I would pick the one that's, he's most passionate about, has the, most appropriate to his aptitude, and then also most profitable, and focus on that. But with the other advisors, they could do it. I do find when you have such differing types of niches, it's really hard to come up with one message for the overall company that encompasses all of those. So it gets really watered down, your overall company messaging, because you're trying to appeal to business owners and widows. And I think you said physicians was the other one.
Yeah.
So they all are in different places and have different needs.
Yeah, I can see the communication, being difficult to streamline without looking like you're all over the place. Like, it's almost like, Oprah, you get a financial plan, you get a financial plan, you get a financial plan. So let's say an advisor chooses a niche, and we can either use an example or just use the example of picking a niche. What's the next step?
So once they pick a niche, the next thing is to develop a message around that's going to resonate with that niche. And that's one of the beautiful things about a niche, is all of a sudden you can say something to your prospective clients that's actually going to hit their pain point. Just saying, we develop a financial plan for peace of mind really doesn't appeal to anybody. But, if you say something like, you're going to pay less on taxes when you sell your business, like, that's going to get somebody's interest. And so that's really the next piece, because you need to then be able to communicate it in through all of your different marketing. And it's one of the important things about marketing is just having a simple message that you communicate over and over again. I always like to bring up the example of like Geico, spend 15 minutes, save 15%, right? They've been saying that for 25 years or more, and people get it, right? It's very simple. And advisors need to figure out that same simple message. Who is it that they're working with? What is the problem? What is their advisor's solution to that problem? And what outcome can they expect? And if you can say that in one sentence and just repeat it in different ways, in your content, on your landing page, on any, your social media accounts, they're going to get it, and they're going to be able to tell other people about what you do. Advisors, for so much of the time, they just tell people all the things that they do. And then even clients have a hard time referring, because they're like, well, he does my investments. That's what they come out with, because that's what they can remember. They don't know all the other pieces. So just really coming up with a good messaging platform for your niche would really be the next step. And then applying that to like your website and any other marketing materials that you have.
Have you read the book, Building a Story Brand?
Yes, we're actually Story Brand certified. So
okay, cool. Yeah.
We use that in our practice.
I'm about, 85% of the way through my second go around of the book. And I'm just at the point where it talks about exactly what you just said, which is figure out what that message is and then put it everywhere. Right, and make sure that your team can communicate that, as well, and not just you, the advisor. And a moment ago, you said, included in, marketing and things like that. So marketing can mean anything from mailers and seminars to social media and podcasting. So when you're helping advisors think through a marketing plan, for their particular niche. And maybe I'm right in this scenario, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the niche to a certain degree can determine what medium you're really focused on. So when it comes to the point of, okay, we've picked a niche, we have a one sentence cohesive message that we've plastered everywhere, and it's now time to think about ongoing marketing. How do you help them think through where to spend most of their energy, how to magnify that effort in other mediums? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I have them, well, first, what I do is I have them interview people in their niche and to pick their brains about where, what publications they read, where they spend their time, to be able to start getting ideas. The obvious ideas are like social media, and that's not necessarily where people are, especially when you get to like high-end business owners or, people that are really busy. They're just not spending a lot of time on social media. So I have them look at first, like, what are the online platforms that these people are spending time at? And it might not be social media. Maybe they have some sort of industry specific platform that they're on, but really just getting into that. And then the next one is, what events are they going to? And this could be online or offline. And then, what media are they consuming? Publications, podcasts, that kind of thing. And specific names of podcasts and media, not just like, oh, they listen to podcasts, but which ones. And then also like, who are the influencers in that industry? And so some of that could be like centers of influence, like what we could traditionally think of centers of influence, but it could also be somebody who's just really important in that niche that can give them access to other people in that niche, but not necessarily referrals. So in our industry, I always think of like Michael Kitces as an influencer, but I wouldn't consider him a center of influence because he's not a professional who's like referring out, specifically. So I have them think through all four of those areas and then start to come up with like, okay, where are you going to spend your time? And depending on where they are, your strategy is going to change, right? Like if it is people who are still going to live events, you're going to live events, right? If it's people who are going just like to listen to podcasts all the time, then you need to start getting onto different podcasts or eventually maybe having your own. So it is very different for every niche. And I don't have like a one size fits all. And I think a lot of people are hoping for that kind of formula, but it doesn't exist. It really depends on who your niche is. And then we also look at content too. So like how are you going to position yourself as an expert and what kind of content are they going to consume? I'm reading a new book called $100 Million Leads right now by Alex Hormozi, and I haven't gotten through it yet, but in the first couple of chapters, he talks about just creating content in every format, right? Like videos, audio, and written, because then you're covering everyone's preference, no matter who it is. And you have the best chance of making sure it gets out there to your audience. So I say the advisors we work with don't do that at this point, but it would be a good goal for most people to be able to just create content in all the different formats. But usually time is a constraint that can't happen.
Yeah, I want to get to that point in a second, but I want to go back, and I say this, tongue in cheek, but what a novel idea when you're figuring out your marketing plan to just ask the people directly, who you're going to be marketing to, and it's so obvious, to do that, and how helpful it can be, yet so commonly overlooked. And I use the veterinarian example because I have a friend of mine who is a CPA, and he primarily focuses on veterinarians. And what he's found, like, he's growing so fast to the point to where, and this is an industry issue for accountants that I've heard from a lot of folks, it's tough to find good talent to add to the team. But they're growing so fast, really in two main ways, or for two main reasons. One is vets know vets. And when you have someone that you work with that specializes in working with you specifically, you're going to tell your veterinarian, colleagues, so to speak, that, hey, you should work with this person. But also, he goes to any and all veterinarian conferences that he can. And he brings, certain members of his team with him. And every conference he goes to, he gets 3 to 5 new clients, and each of those clients are paying between 15 and 40 or $50,000, annually to work with them. So it just goes to show that when you sort of insert yourself into the group of people that you're looking to work with. I have another client of mine who works mainly with attorneys, the niche that I got away from rather quickly, but he's kind of cracked the code with that space to where, what he does is he hosts various, networking events, CLE credits and things like that, for attorneys, as a creative way to get in front of them and build a relationship with them. And now he exclusively works, with attorneys. So, those are kind of two different niches, two different strategies, both very, very effective. But you made a point a moment ago about, because I'm a big believer, whether it's Alex Hormozi or Gary Vaynerchuk is a big believer in this too, which is meet your audience where they're at. And some people like to read, some people like to watch, some people like to listen, some people like to laugh, and your content needs to take multiple forms. But you brought up an important point of, like, these are advisors, right? Not marketers necessarily. So how do you help advisors think through, okay, I need to do all this stuff, I don't have a ton of time. Do I pick one thing and focus on it? Do I hire it out? What if I don't have the capital to hire it out? How do they become marketers when their main responsibility is being an advisor?
Right. This usually I would say that they should pick the medium that their clients are most interested in. But in reality, I think it's better for them to pick the medium they're most comfortable working in. So whether that's writing or video or podcasts, because they're more likely to do it consistently. And so I would say, pick one to start with, and then use, just keep doing it consistently. You can hire some of that stuff out. You can hire ghostwriters. I mean, now you can use ChatGPT or AI to do it. And I would say if you do that, you just still need to direct what the topic is going to be and put your own, spin on it and just make it your own, because it'll be pretty obvious if it's just like a AI generated article. So those are some options that you can do. When someone really starts in a niche, I encourage them to create their own content, because it helps them learn more about their niche and do research, and it gives them more confidence in what they're saying. Because a lot of the people I work with, they might have 3 or 4 clients like this. It's not really an area that they've been spending a lot of time in. So they have just enough knowledge, but they need to learn more. And so creating content can really help with that. If you're doing something like a podcast, you can definitely hire out all the editing and a lot of that. And there's different levels. You are going to trade time for money. And so if you don't have the money, you have to put in the time. If you have the money, you can spend less of your time.
Yeah. And going back to someone I brought up a moment ago, Gary Vaynerchuk, we've sort of adopted his mindset. So one of the things that we help clients with is I think it's unrealistic, as we kind of just alluded to a certain degree, for an advisor to do a podcast, take care of all the editing, also write a blog, also have, video, also have all these different, call it mediums and methods to put content out there. And, I think it's unrealistic to think that they're going to post 3 to 5 times a week, themselves, and come up with something new and interesting every single time. So one of the things Gary Vee talks about is macro and micro content, right? So we help advisors with, hey, let's do a long form podcast, right? Let's do a long form video, or let's do a long form, kind of like what we're doing right now, which is a podcast, but we're on Zoom so we can see each other. And as a result, they send that to us, or they send it to whatever provider they want. And we help them take that long form piece. We chop up a bunch of social collateral, from headshots and quotes to little mini video clips, audio clips. And then depending on what the topic is of that particular podcast, we could probably extract a blog or 2 from that have a nice infographic to go along with it as well. And then they do that for an hour or two every month, and they have their month's worth of content done. But the challenge with that is you either need to do it yourself, which requires a lot of time, and it's probably not your expertise. You have to play project manager and go on Fiverr and Upwork and Freelancer, and maybe in some instances deal with the language barrier and the difference of time zones, because these people are all over the world, and people with different skill sets. You'll have a designer, a copywriter, an editor, and all these different folks. And you got to play project manager, have someone on your team play project manager with all those parties, or cough up some extra money and work with a single provider that can handle all of that. So I guess I share that because, and I think you would agree, but push back if you don't. If they don't have the time or expertise and they don't have the capital, they should probably just pick one thing, commit to it, and then build off of that as time goes on. Is that a fair next step?
I would totally agree with that. Don't take on more than what you can consistently implement. And so, though I have to say, especially when you're starting a niche, like the more volume and, frequency that people can see you, the faster you're going to make progress. But that doesn't have to mean necessarily a lot of content. It could also just be that you're reaching out to people a lot, just on emails. Like that is a form of marketing. I mean, it's more like cold or sales, but you just have to have that activity on a regular basis. And so I have to say, like, social media, I think is a good way to nurture relationships, but I don't think it's necessarily a great way to bring in clients. So I put less emphasis on social media than I think a lot of people do. It is a good way to keep your name out there once you're connected to people. But, if I wanted to bring in clients quickly, I would be focusing on like, how do I leverage other people's networks to get in front of them? Like, can I go on a podcast and be a guest? Can I go speak at an event? So like those forms I would spend more time on than social media. And I think people think that they should be doing social media because they've been hearing about it for so long. And it's also something they can do from home or from their office, and it's easy. But I don't really think it's all that effective from a lead generation standpoint. It's very good for nurturing and staying in front of people. Like once they're kind of in your network, you might disagree with me, but I would be spending more time on like, how do I get in front of people? I'm going to guest post on these different websites or these newsletters. I'm going to speak at this event. That's where I'd be spending my time.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree, although I have a slightly different view on that, where I think people, they hear about the success of other people in other industries building their business through social media. And let's say there's a company that sells widgets. Like that's something, if the widget is good, it's something that's fairly easy to scale through paid ads and things like that. But in our industry, there's so much trust involved, and it takes time. And for you to rely solely on social media is a bad strategy. It's simply, a fishing analogy, a line in the water. And then when you think about it, in order for social media to be effective, there needs to be some sort of incredibly valuable offer for them to opt in to going to your website, getting on your email list. And then let's say, and the relevance thing, right? Keeping your name in front of them, utilizing social media for that, 100% agree. But the challenge becomes, let's say you are working with a client, that client has a friend, and they say, hey, you should talk to my advisor. And they don't make an introduction. They don't reach out right away, but they go and they find you on social. Maybe they listen to you as a guest on a podcast. Maybe they read your ebook. Maybe they interacted with more of your social posts. And then finally, they reach out and say, hey, I'd like to meet. Who gets credit? Right.
Yeah, I know.
The marketing plan. So I think what we're both saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is you need to be on social to a certain degree. You need to be going to events if that's relevant with your niche. You need to be asking clients for referrals. After you deliver a wonderful experience, not just great service, you need to be building relationships with COIs, and you need to be like boots on the ground and not hiding behind your computer. But over time, it works as an entire machine, and then it becomes difficult, I think, in a good way, to determine, well, what aspect of my quote unquote marketing plan gets credit for bringing this person in. It's like, well, your marketing machine gets credit.
I talk about this in my book. Funnels is what a lot of advisors want a funnel, but it's really more of like an ecosystem that you have to create, right? Because your client may potentially spend, let's say, $200,000 with you over the course of their lifetime, right? That's a huge ask. And so they have to really trust you and get to know you. They also have to be at a point where they have pain and urgency that they want to actually take advantage of your services. And so to make all of that happen, you have to just kind of hit them everywhere. That's why it's important to be in a niche, because it's a smaller group of people. And so it's easier to stay in front of them and become a part of their community and become relevant. And so they just keep hearing about you. I know for my business, when I look at how people heard about me, it's all over the place. They're like, I don't know, I just have heard your name, or I'm on your mailing list, but then I got your book, and some are like, Kitz's podcast from 6 years ago. I was like, geez, and then still getting that. So it's all over. And the point is like, when you are a part of a community and you just become just an expert in that, people are just going to come to you from all different areas. And that's good. As much as we love a funnel, it just doesn't work exactly like that in this industry. Though whenever I think you have a campaign, you should always think about the funnel to make sure that it's effective and people aren't falling through the holes. Like you said, like if we're on social media, you want to get them into your newsletter. And so thinking about funnels from that standpoint, into your email list, it makes a lot of sense, because then you're being efficient. But I don't think you should expect that you're going to create one campaign and everyone is going to come through that the way you'd like it, like selling a widget on Facebook or Instagram.
I kind of just had this light bulb moment, and we'll talk about more of this shortly, but we talked about Alex Hormozi a little while ago, and I first came across him, gosh, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years ago, whenever he started getting bigger on social, and he was known for scaling up gyms and then selling the system for other gyms to scale up. And then he started getting into acquiring businesses with his website. I think it's acquisition or acquisitions.com. And I knew of him. I also came across his wife, who is also very entrepreneurial, saw some of her content as well, but I didn't really start to overly take him seriously until, not take him seriously, that's not the right way to put it, but I didn't really become overly interested in buying anything from him until 3 things happened. And these all happened fairly recently. So one, he was a guest on a podcast that I've listened to since 2016 called, it was the MF CEO, which you can deduce what the MF stands for, which is now the Real AF by Andy Frisella. He was a guest on his show. I started seeing people on social media, posting about him. And then you chose the book that we're going to talk about shortly by him, which is going to cause me after this to order his book. And again, back to my point a moment ago that you and I just talked about, is what gets credit there, right? It's the ecosystem, it's the consistency and the relevance, that he built over time. And it's not like it's, a huge deal. He's going to, get $20-$30, from me with the book. But it's just cool to see how sometimes good things just take time to get you over the hump to actually make that purchase, whatever that purchase is.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a really good example of having really good content everywhere. And so it just makes you finally just want to buy his book.
Like, okay, you got me.
Now, does that translate into wanting me to have him invest in my business, which is what his goal is? I don't know about that, but maybe someday.
So we've talked about niche. We talked about content. Let's talk about becoming an expert. So I kind of went through this when I transitioned from being an advisor to getting into the consulting space. And I had this sort of, theory that I picked up. I think it was from Gary Vee, where you have kind of three circles of people when you go out and try and be an expert. It's the first inner circle is your family and friends, and it's kind of split between being incredibly supportive and busting your chops and kind of keeping you in check. And then you have the second circle of people where they know you, they're supportive, but there's a little bit of separation. Maybe they're old friends from high school or things like that. And then there's the third circle of people that don't know you and just met you through your content. So in their eyes, they don't know necessarily your backstory, where you came from, what you did before. They just already see you up here. And then over time, the second and the first circle start to view you as an expert as well, assuming that you're consistent, your content is good, and you follow through with what you say you're going to do. So my question to you is, when an advisor says, okay, I picked a niche, I've decided on what my marketing strategy is, how do I now position myself as an expert?
Yeah, so they really need to think about what the pain points are and what's unique about their niche and really hit on those topics, and then create content around that. A lot of the convincing people you're an expert is just that you're talking about the same thing over and over again. So you can position yourself as an expert on social media because you only talk about this one thing. And so they're going to assume, well, this is all he or she talks about. You must be an expert. I do have to say that there's certain content that will elevate you to expert status pretty quickly. A podcast is one of them. And I think a book is another one, because of the commitment that it takes to do it. People assume that you're an expert in that area if you're going to put that much time and effort into it. Though when you're just starting a niche, a book is really unreasonable to do. I can tell you, having just written one, it's a lot of work. But podcasts, if that's something that they're interested in doing, I think that's a really good way to become an expert, or to at least position yourself as an expert. And then you can bring in other experts in your niche, which also elevates your status as well. So if you're trying to be an expert from that standpoint, that's a really good way of doing it. I also think if you can get published in niche specific publications on a regular basis, that will help you look like an expert as well, because you're getting the validation or the recommendation from that publication. So I'm working with an advisor right now that is going into blended families. And so he's looking at some of these like stepmom magazines and some of those types of publications. And as soon as he's in there and you can say, as featured in stepmom magazine, like you start to become an expert that way. So, you can position yourself as an expert just by creating a lot of content and sharing it on social media and looking that way. But if you can use some sort of other publication, organization, that kind of thing, that will help you get become an expert quicker, or at least appear to be an expert quicker.
Yeah, I think to hit on, like, as long as you're doing so in a genuine way, and not like pulling the wool over someone's eyes, there is a certain degree of perception being reality. So if you're putting yourself out as an expert and that's what people are perceiving, then that ultimately is the reality of what's going on. And what's interesting, I just had this thought come into mind. So I have a former client. We did some work together more formally as well, and a friend, Justin Goodbread. And what's interesting is, a moment ago, we talked about how you take that macro piece of content and chop it up. And you had said too that, sometimes, writing a book is a big undertaking. And I don't disagree with that. But one in between step that you could do is a 15, 20 page ebook, right? That someone can download. They get the PDF, but on your website or landing page, you have it designed looking like an actual book. So it kind of looks a little bit more legitimate, but that's a good in-betweener step that doesn't cost a lot of money. But what Justin did, which I thought was amazing, is he puts out so much content, podcast episodes, both interview style and monologue about certain topics. He writes blogs. He does videos as well, lots of social content. And granted, this cost a pretty penny, but what he did is he hired a copywriting company to go through and analyze all the content that he's put out over the years and take that and turn it into he's got 2 books out now, I believe, turn it into 2 different cohesive books, all done in reverse, right? So he spent years doing micro content, and then they basically compiled all that and turned it into, something even more legitimate. So that's an option too. It just is going to cost you, couple, 2, 3, $10, so to speak. So.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I've been writing for years. And so what I did was I outlined what my book was going to be, and I could pull a lot of things that I'd written for different publications and things like that. And then where I saw there were holes, I would just start writing articles. As I was writing the book, I would turn them into articles and submit them to like advisor perspectives. So I write a lot for them. And so then it would be something I could use as I went along so I didn't have to wait a year and a half for all of this content, right? I could write it as I was going and publish it in different places. The thing is, you have to make sure that you're allowed to use it if it's published on a website or some other publication. So that's one thing to think about. But for my next book, which I will write at some point, I won't have as much content written already. So I will outline it and then write articles to fill in for that outline. And so that's a way to do it. It's kind of the opposite, but same sort of thing, where you're not just sitting down and writing a book from scratch.
Awesome. We've talked about choosing a niche, content, and other marketing strategies. We've talked about becoming an expert. So before we wrap up, two things to end with. So we've already kind of alluded to it, but if this is your first time listening to an episode, one of the things that we ask all of our guests is about a book that's had an impact on them and why. And the whole idea is to try and help distill a reading list for all of you. And I know you said, Kristen, that you're in the midst of reading it right now, but still curious to know why you chose it. $100 million offers by Alex Hormozi. You mentioned before that he talks about creating content in a bunch of different my but why else did you pick that book? What's the impact that it's had on you so far?
So there's actually 2 books. So $100 million offers is the one I said that is probably my favorite book right now. He's a little controversial, so I was a little hesitant to bring that up because some people just really don't like his style.
I like his style, so.
Okay. But what I like about it is he creates these really simple frameworks around business ideas for you to think about, like how to add more value to your business. And, I read a lot about marketing, but from the $100 million offers is really about creating so much value that it's hard for people to say no to what you're doing. And I just really love that concept. And it's like, what else can you do where you can just get people to be more successful, but it's not necessarily on you specifically, right? Like, so you can just add, how do you just keep adding more value? And so I really enjoyed the book. I've read it 2 or 3 times now. Mostly it's around like kind of business operations. There is marketing piece of it, but the offer is kind of the most important thing before you market and sell it. And so really enjoyed that. He just came out with a new book I think it was in August, called $100 Million Leads. And that's the one that I'm just starting to read.
Oh,
and
okay.
So I know it's confusing.
I mix that up.
Yeah. And so that's the one who was talking about content in all these different ways. And again, He has very simple frameworks about, how do you reach different people in different stages? So you have warm leads and you have cold leads, and then there's different strategies for each of those. And I've not finished it, but I really love the book already. And I can just see how I'm going to use that with my clients to be able to just make it more simple when you think about how are you reaching different people in different categories.
And I don't want to skip over what you just said, going back to becoming an expert. We're similar in that you just said, I can't wait to use this with my clients. So part of becoming an expert, whether it's you and I or an advisor out there, is learn about your client's life or industry. If you're working with veterinarians, like, learn about everything there is to know about running a veterinarian business, from like the software they use to how they market. Because if you can add tidbits of that outside of the scope of what you're compensated for in financial planning, why would they work with anyone else if they're getting everything, from you? You're a wealth of knowledge, and that just takes time to ingest content to learn and share that with them. So that's a pretty important point I didn't want to skip over.
Yeah, I just was talking to two different advisors yesterday that each had very interesting designations that for their niche. So one works with widows, and he was getting training in like grief counseling, and so that he could work with the widows better. And another one is dealing with long-term care, and they, I think, were certified in some sort of dementia care. And it's not that they want to do dementia care, but they wanted to really understand what it's like to care for somebody with dementia so that they could relate to their clients. So yeah, when you get into a niche, you can really start adding on knowledge and expertise in other areas that there's no advisor that's going to do that, because that's just, they don't have enough emphasis in that area to make it worth it to do that.
Yeah, I feel like there's different phases of becoming an expert in the niche. It's, understanding enough to be dangerous, seeing if it works, seeing if you're starting to acquire a lot of those clients. And then it's like, all right, let's go all in and get some of those tangential, designations or, whatever that thing may be. Once okay, we're in it now. Well, cool, Kristen, this has been wonderful. I appreciate you taking the time in joining. And if I'm listening to this and I'm like, man, I'm all over the place with my business and the people that I currently serve and the people that I think I want to serve, and I want to learn more. How do I reach out to you? Let us know obviously about your book, and thank you for the copy that you sent to me that I got this morning. Where can people find you? How should they interact with you?
Yeah. So if you're interested in what we've been talking about today, the first place I would send you is to get my book. And if you are in the US and associated with an independent RIA, you can actually get it for free on our website, which is onniche.com. If you're outside of the US, you can just get it on Amazon, Kindle, all of the online retailers. As of this recording, it's not available on Audible, but I believe by the time this comes out, it will be. So you can find it there as well. Yeah. And then if people are interested in implementing what is in the book, again, onniche.com. Best place to connect with me is LinkedIn. That's pretty much the social media that I spend time on now. And it's Kristen Luke. And company website is Kaleido Creative. But I gave you a lot of stuff there. I would say go download, go out, request the book. We'll send you a free copy at onniche.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today and for your time and attention as always. Kristen, appreciate you joining. And the other Kristen, if you're listening to this, thanks again for bringing us together. And we'll catch you all in the next episode. Have a good day, Kristen.
Thanks, David.